with numerous different interactions and the ability to recycle themselves from the graveyard. The master of the grind game is here to stay. The REGENESIS. The REGENESIS are a series of high-level monsters with various type and attributes that synergize with monster that has 25,000 attack or defense. And yes, they themselves all have this specific stat line. Let's break down card by card to see what makes this deck so unique. This is the full REGENESIS Breakdown. Released in the very aptly named Regeneration of Star on September 2025, this pack gives us almost all of the REGENESIS cards except for one, which is the REGENESIS Overload. But this is still a pretty complete package even without it. So let's break it down, card by card. Starting off on the monster side, we got the main searcher of the deck, the REGENESIS Archetype. This is a level 8 Earth Fiend monster. It reads, you can special summon this card from your hand by revealing one other monster with 25,000 attack or defense in your hand. So, to even summon this card, you need a healthy density of monster with 25,000 attack or defense in your deck, or a way to consistently search for one. And when it is summoned, you can search for any REGENESIS card you want, or it can recycle one of your banished REGENESIS cards, which is crucial if you want to go into the long game. The last effect of this card reads, during your opponent's end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent at this turn, you can add it to your hand. This is the effect that is shared between multiple different REGENESIS monsters, and it is the reason why this deck has an amazing grind game. Do note that this effect only triggers if this card is sent to the graveyard during your opponent's turn, which means they may not always be able to come back. The next 3 cards all have pretty similar effects, and you may consider them as the payoff for the REGENESIS archetype. Starting off with the REGENESIS Warrior. This is a level 7 Fire Warrior monster that can special summon itself if there is a monster with 25,000 original attack or defense on the field. It has a quick effect to trigger itself to target one monster your opponent controls and return it to the hand. Of course, like the Archfiend, it can also return itself to your hand during your opponent's end phase. The next card is the REGENESIS Dragon. This is a level 8 Wind Dragon monster that pretty much has the same effect as the REGENESIS Warrior, but this time it would banish a spell or trap card your opponent controls instead. Next up is the REGENESIS Sage. This is a level 7 Water Spellcaster monster that can negate an opponent card or effect by sending one REGENESIS card from your hand or field to the graveyard. Finally, we have the REGENESIS Boss monster, the REGENESIS Lord. It can only be special summoned from your hand by banishing one monster you control with 25,000 original attack and defense. It is not difficult to summon, but it is pretty difficult to get back once it leaves the field. When it is special summoned, you can set one REGENESIS spell or trap from your deck to your side of the field. This is more consistency for the deck, which is very welcome, because this deck does not have any extra deck monster, so it's not very flexible in terms of its plays. It also has one last effect to help push through the opponent's board if you're going second, is that it gains 25,000 attack during the battle phase, and it inflicts piercing battle damage to a defense position monster. This makes this card a pretty lethal force, especially when it's paired with its counterpart, the REGENESIS Overlord. Now this card has not been released in masterduel as of yet, but I think it is a pretty good card to have in this deck as well. This one can special summon itself from the grave by banishing 2 monsters from your grave with 25,000 original attack and defense. And it also have a pretty good board breaking effects, as it can return cards your opponent control or in the graveyard back to the hand, up to the number of your banished monster with 25,000 original attack or defense. And as the icing on the cake, it also makes all of your opponent monsters lose 25,000 attack during the battle phase, which is a better effect than the REGENESIS Lord in my opinion, because it also helps your other REGENESIS monster to push through the opponent's board as well. And that is it for the monster. Overall, this is a pretty simple archetype. It does not have any inherent combo. You just want to put up some of your REGENESIS monster on the field as roadblock for the opponent, and then utilize their recycling effects to win you in the long game. And so, to help with the consistency, we also have some very powerful spell for this archetype as well. Simply named Regenesis. This is a powerful searcher for your Regenesis monster that can also work as a generic searcher for a monster with a specific stat line of 25,000 attack and defense. Which right now, beside the Regenesis monster themselves, there's not a lot of option for this card, but it is something to keep in mind for the future. It also has a secondary effect to banish itself from the graveyard, except during the turn it is sent there, to special summon one of your Regenesis monster from the grave. This helps even more with the recursion power of the deck, and help recycle some Regenesis monster that was sent to the graveyard during your turn, because otherwise they won't be able to come back with their own effects. One cool thing about this card is that you can use both of its effects during the same turn, if you have one in your hand and one in the graveyard already, which can come up more than you think, so you might want to keep this in mind to fully utilize this card. The next spell is also equally important, the Regenesis Code. It can just special summon one Regenesis monster from your deck at the cost of locking you out of the extra deck entirely for the rest of this turn and the next turn. This is a little bit better than just adding a Regenesis monster to your hand, as it circumvents the Regenesis Archfiend needing to reveal a monster with 25,000 attack or defense in your hand to summon itself. But of course, you do need a little bit of planning with this card if you also want to use your extra deck. And just like our first spell, this card also has an effect in the graveyard to banish itself except during the turn it is sent there, to special summon one of your banished Regenesis monster. This effect is pretty great to get back the body you used to summon your Regenesis Lord. Between these two spells, and the fact that your Archfiend can also recycle your spell, you basically will never run out of resources, as long as you can keep using their effects. Okay, now let's talk about some utility cards in Regenesis. These may not always be run in some Regenesis lists, but they all have their own uses. Starting off with the Regenesis Cycle. This is a normal spell that reads, if you control a monster with 25,000 original attack or defense, target one card your opponent control, or 2 if you control a Regenesis Lord and banish those cards. Because this is a normal spell, this card is being opted out of most lists, since this is pretty much a deck card going first. But regardless, this is a very powerful effect, because you can always set this card with your Regenesis Lord to ensure you can always banish 2 cards on the field. There is also the secondary effect to banish this card from the grave to special summon one monster with 25,000 attack or defense from your hand, which sadly is pretty much irrelevant since all of your Regenesis monsters can already do this. So unless you have a very specific target for this card, it's probably not really worth running in most lists. This card, however, the Regenesis Birth, is very much worth it to run. It is a continuous trap that can send one Regenesis monster from your deck to your grave, and then target one monster your opponent control and change it to face down defense position. This is already a very solid disruption on its own, but it can also pseudo search for any Regenesis monster you want, as they would return to your hand during the end phase. Its secondary effect can special summon as many Regenesis monsters as you want from your hand, graveyard, or banishment by sending this card to the graveyard. This can be used to help defend yourself or go for a lethal push. But do keep in mind that you can only use one of these effects per turn. And lastly, we have the Regenesis Command. This is a normal trap that affects all cards your opponent control in the same column as your Regenesis monsters. If they are face up, they are negated, and if they are face down, they either cannot change their battle position or they cannot be activated until the end of the next turn. While this is a cool concept in theory, it is actually very hard to get value out of this card. 1. It is pretty easy to play around as the opponent. And 2. Regenesis actually has a very hard time to put up a lot of monsters on the field. So if you want to use this card, you need to build your deck with a heavy density of Regenesis monster. Okay, now that we're done analyzing all of the cards, let's do a recap. The Regenesis has a bunch of mini-boss monsters that is easy to summon and provide some form of disruption. They want to be kept around as an endboard piece rather than being used as a part of a combo. Because of this deck can have a lot of different starters that provide a lot of consistency. an upward to 9 in-engine card in an otherwise pretty small package. And because of their one-to-one nature, you can only have as much disruption as the number of non-duplicate Regenesis cards you open. The selling point of these entire archetypes is definitely its recursion power. Even though the power ceiling of the deck is pretty low, you can still overwhelm your opponent with increment value the longer the game goes on. Of course, you are pretty receptive to graveyard disruption like Keldo, Mudora, White Binder, or even Little Knight. So this is not by any means a foolproof strategy. Overall, because of the limited number of disruption, combined with the lack of flexibility in terms of play pattern, the Regenesis on their own cannot compete with top-tier strategies. But one big strength about Regenesis is that they don't need a normal summon, or even extra deck slots. So you can very easily mix this deck with various different archetypes to boost its power, or you can even use them as a supplement engine for other decks as well. Okay, now let's talk about what engine and tech choice you should run in this deck. First, I want to talk about how to use Regenesis as a supplement engine for other decks. The one key thing to keep in mind if you want to run Regenesis is that magic stat line of 25,000 attack or defense. Your deck needs to be consistently search or summon a monster with such a stat line so you don't break on your Regenesis monsters. You also want to adjust the number of Regenesis cards you are running in your deck depending on which archetype you are using. For example, if you're running a deck like Ryzeal, the monster in your extra deck will be the bridge into your Regenesis cards. If this is the case, you'll probably do better with a smaller Regenesis package. You would want to cut or run just one Archfiend since you cannot consistently summon it. And if you do run Archfiend, you can consider running one copy of the Regenesis Birth as well. I would still max out on the Regenesis since it is the best searcher, and maybe just one copy of the Regenesis Code. For the other monster, I would run just one copy of each, and maybe even cut Sage if I'm not using the Archfiend. Let's look at another example. If your deck has a consistent way to gain access to a 25,000 stat monster in the main deck, like Voiceless Void can with Saphira, you can consider running a bigger Regenesis package. You can still use the previous setup as well if you want to keep your deck size smaller. But you can also commit to the Regenesis package and max out all of your searcher. You will still play all of the other Regenesis monsters at one time, because that's all you need. And in a bigger version, you can also play one copy of the Regenesis cycle to help with your board breaking capabilities, because you're not gonna be able to play a lot of non-engine. Okay, now let's talk about some tech choices for the pure version of the deck, where the Regenesis card is the main focus. The first engine that obviously pairs very well with this deck is the Dogmatica engine. Since the Regenesis don't really care about using the extra deck, you can use the very powerful Nadir Servant like a toolbox to give you what you need depending on the situation. And Fleur-de-Lis, being a 25,000 static monster, also help with the consistency of the deck. Next up, we have Diabellstar, the Black Witch. Being a 25,000 attack minion, this monster opens up a lot of different opportunities for Regenesis. It can set up some disruption, like the Silvera or the Morian. Or if you need some board breaking card, you can also play Subversion. And that's not all, you can also segue into an Azamina package. That's not only add extra disruption into the deck, but it can also help the deck be more consistent by having a way to search for your wanted spell. Next, we have the Bestials. They are obviously very good for their stat line and their generic effects. So depending on the meta, you can adjust the amount of Bestial you want to play in your deck. You should note though that most of the main Regenesis monsters are not light or dark, so you will have a hard time summoning your Bestial and your Lubellion and getting value out of your regain. The next engine need no introduction. It is the Kashtira. They are solid in pretty much every meta and very low commitment for your deck. Just only 4 cards in total. You can't really go wrong with them. The next one may seem a little bit weird, but it's actually pretty good. It is Eldritch. More specifically, just Eldritch and the Delta of Invitation. If you really want to commit to the grind game, then you would like this engine, since these two cards is basically infinite recursion for your outlage. If you're running a bigger version of Regenesis, or a mill version, then you definitely want to use this engine. Any combination of them will work, but for simplicity's sake, you can go with just 1-to-1 ratio. If you're having trouble with consistency, you can also include any number of these 3 cards to help search for your Archetype, or a very common inclusion in this list, a Lava Golem. You do need to be careful though, because if you're normal summon tour guy, you won't be able to summon your Lava Golem anymore. And lastly, we have this 3 trap, which is pretty much an auto-include in any pure Regenesis version. They doesn't affect this deck much at all, and can win game by themselves in certain matchup. Of course, these are only some of the ways to play with Regenesis, so keep experimenting until you find something that you like. For now, let's check out a sample Regenesis decklist that I have built for this season. And here it is, a very compact 40 card version of the deck that maxes out on all of the searcher. In terms of supplementary engine, we have a minimal Ryzeal package with 1 Magnamut, 1 Druid Swarm, and 1 Board Drake with no Lubellion. We are also playing with the Kashira package, and we max out on the Lava Golem. We are not running with the Dogmatica engine because we are playing the Pulse of Extravagance. We of course have the trap to help us with going first. And there is a surprise inclusion in this list, that is the Pinpoint Landing, which I think is pretty cute. Shout out to Jesse Perez for the idea of this card. It is a continuous spell that once per turn draw you a card if a monster is special summoned from your hand, which is exactly what this deck loves to do. Basically, it is a better version of Regain for Regenesis. The actual deck is just a mishmash of random cards, because we mostly don't really use it, except for a couple of key cards like Big Eye, Typhon, or Little Knight. All in all, this is a pretty fun control deck, and a pretty decent rogue choice at the moment. So if you want to take a break from all the meta decks, and just chill and don't have to think too hard, then this might just be the deck that you want to play. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. I will have more breakdown video coming in the future, so tell me in the comment, which archetype would you like to see get a full breakdown of? For now, please enjoy some replay of this deck, and see the Regenesis archetype in action.